Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
And I want us to spend a few minutes looking into Parshat Lekh L'kha. And Lekh L'kha is the beginning of the particular part of our story, which lasts, of course, all the way through the end of the Torah. Right? The first chapters of Genesis is the Torah's introduction to the world, to humanity, to God, to reality. And then, all of a sudden, seemingly poof, with no warning, Avraham becomes a character that God has a personal relationship. Avraham is not the first person that God speaks to. Right? God speaks to Adam and Chava. God speaks to Cain, to Cain after the murder. God speaks to Noach. But it seems to us, by reading this text, that there's something special going on here. And the question that, of course, no one has a good answer to is to why. And even the question why can be asked several ways. Why Avraham, which could be a version of a question of why us, what made or makes us so special. What's another version of the why question that you could ask at the inflection point of Lekh L'kha? Besides why Avraham? What's that? Why did he leave? Well, before that, what other grand why about the arc of the story could we be asking just as God starts speaking to Avraham?
Well, the part about, and for all the people of the earth will look to you for that part amazes me. I don't know if that's a why question.
I want to go even before that. Before God reaches from the heavens and speaks to Avraham, we might have the question of why Avraham. What other why might we be curious about? Stevie? Right. Why? Correct. Why pick anybody? What's the point of having a particular person through whom a particular community is going to be developed? Why now? Right? If we take the Torah as a document, not of history, but of truth, right? What is it about this moment of prehistory that suggests that God is now ready to have an intimate relationship with humanity, right? Why after the Tower of Babel, or why after several generations after the flood? Why is this happening? Why is it happening now? Why is it happening to Avraham? Another way of asking all these questions is what we're witness to in the beginning of Lekh L'kha that's going to set the stage for the rest of the Torah. Is it saying more about God, or is it saying more about Avraham and Avraham's people? Right? All of that is hanging out and hovering before we get to the words, Vayomer Adonai el Avram Lekh L'kha. God said to Abraham, go forth. Assuming we take for granted at face value that that's indeed what happened, right? If we're saying, well, maybe it didn't happen the way, then we're not studying Torah anymore, right? But if we're studying Torah, right before God opens God's mouth and speaks to Avram and says, go somewhere, all these hovering questions of why are there, okay?
He chose Abraham.
Right, that's one of the whys. Why Avraham? Why now? Why anyone at all, right? Okay, so I want to do a couple of commentaries with you. Two from Breshit Rabbah, which is the classic Agadic narrative midrash on Breshit, and then one commentary by the Maharal of Prague, who is the great Kabbalist and Talmudist and leader of the Czech Jewish community, the Prague Jewish community. Okay. The two midrashim that we're going to look at, sources 1 and 2, follow a certain midrashic category called the petichta. The Aramaic word petichta, if you know enough Hebrew, you know it begins with the root patach. What does patach mean? Open. And a petichta, open. A petichta begins with a rabbi opening, using the word patach, with a verse from somewhere else in the Bible that the rabbi is going to use as kind of a slide into his commentary. So, If you look at source number 1, Vayomer Adonai el Avram, God said to Avram, Lekh L'kha, take you, me'artzecha, from your land, etc. Okay, so the Vagomer means, and you know the rest. And you quote the verse, Breshit 12:1. Rabbi Yitzchak patach. Rabbi Yitzchak opened, that's why it's called a patichta, because he patach. He opened by quoting a verse from the book of Psalms, chapter 45. And there, in the book of Psalms, we have this verse. Shim'i bat, listen up, daughter. Uri'i, take a look. Vehati oznech, and attune your ear. Veshichechi amech, forget your people. Uveit avich, and the house of your father. Whatever that verse means in context, it doesn't matter, because Rabbi Yitzchak is bringing it as a frame to try to deal with a question, what could possibly make someone leave, forget where they came from, forget their beginnings, and forget their father's household, right? So that verse, he's almost like, I'm ruminating on this moment of Lekh L'kha, and I'm ruminating on this verse from Tehillim, which asks a daughter to leave everything behind. And so what's going to come is some kind of an allegory or some kind of an explanation for what might make someone take everything or leave everything that they know behind to go on to another adventure. Okay, he continues. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Mashal. This can be compared to. So this is an allegory, a story. Le'achad, Mashal le'achad, compared to a person. Shahaya over mimakom l'makom. He was sojourning from place to place. V'ra'a bira achat doleket. And saw a bira. Bira is sometimes translated as a building, but it could also mean a palace. And I want you to know that as we read this very famous midrashic image, there are many, many different ways that this is understood. But he saw one building, doleket. What does doleket mean? Lit up or on fire. Okay. What's unclear is the image that he saw somebody with somebody inside it having a light on, which suggests what? It's inhabited. But some people say that bira doleket doesn't mean it's a palace that's inhabited, but a bira doleket means a palace that is on fire, right? So either the image is one of domesticity and habitation or one of emergency. The Midrash leaves it ambiguous, okay? We're not sure. Amar, the person who was walking around all of a sudden sees this building with a light in it or it on fire, says, Tomar, could it possibly be Shehabira hazo below manhig, that this domicile, this building, doesn't have someone who is in charge of it? Now think of the two different versions of the story. If it means that it's inhabited, then the person looking at it saying, if there's a candle on in this building, then it means that someone lit it. How could it could not have lit on its own, right? You can already begin to think of the associations between this and someone ruminating about the origin of the world. Or, if you see a building on fire, and the person says, could it be that nobody is in charge of it? Then what's the valence of the question? What's the valence of the question if the image of it, is it completely on fire? Right, like someone's got to be responsible for this emergency, right? Two different feelings. Either one person is responsible for the fact that someone lit a fire inside, or someone's got to be responsible for this burning mess of a building, right? And you can imagine, by the way, before we even get to the jump in the Midrash, the world being described either of two ways. You could look at the world and see a lot of things happening in it and say, well, someone had to make this happen. Like, lights don't come on their own. I'm sure you've wondered that yourself. Or you can look at the world as a terribly messed up place, on fire, emergencies everywhere. And then the question is someone not going to take responsibility for this? There's got to be someone who is responsible for this. So inside the story, Heitzitz alav bal habira, the person who actually owned the palace, looks out upon the wayfarer. Amarlo, he says to him, Anihu bal habira, I'm in charge. So depending on which version of the Midrash you're going with, I'm in charge and I lit the fire, right? I started it all, which is sort of Maimonides' proof of the existence of God, that somebody had to start the earth rotating. Or, it's my palace, I know it's on fire, I'll take responsibility for it. That I will make sure that it's put out or it's attended to. All of that is the mashal, the story. Kach lefi shahaya avinu Avraham omer. This is exactly what Avraham, our father, was kind of saying in the world as he walked through the world. He said, Tomar shaha'olam hazeh below manhig. He looked at the world. And again, two versions. Either he saw the wonder of a light on, meaning the wonder of life, the wonder of consciousness, the wonder of order, and said, could there not be someone who started this off? Or the opposite, right? What recently happened in the Torah, the flood, the Tower of Babel, destruction, he saw chaos. He saw problems. And he said, there's got to be someone in charge of this that I can turn to. Either way, he asked the question, Heitzitz alav hakadosh baruch hu, the Holy One, looked out upon Avraham, who is the sojourner, va'amarlo, and he said to him, Anihu bal ha'olam, I'm the one in charge. Okay. According to this midrash, and again, it's a petichta, what would make someone leave everything that they knew behind? Some kind of unexpected encounter with the manhig of the world, with the creator of the universe. And how is this midrash answering the question, why now or why Avraham? What's this midrash's answer to that question? Got to push a little further than that. Why this? If this midrash is an answer to the question of why now and why Avraham, what's its answer? Steve, are you going to answer that or something else? Use the mic. I know there's only one extra one, but people on Zoom can only hear if it's on the mic. So hold your thought, Stevie. How is this midrash an answer to why now and why Avraham? Brian? Use the mic, if you can. Take it off the stand. The mic, come on. Take it off the stand. It's much easier to pass. You won't hear yourself, but they hear you. Okay. Aha. So that might so one way of potentially suggesting it is that there is a problem in the universe, and Avram happened to be walking by, and he's the nearest one, and so God said, I'm going to make you my people. What makes him the best equipped, according to the Midrash? According to the Midrash and the analogy, what makes this man the best equipped? Alan?
That he actually sees the fire and someone.
Okay, so this midrash has answered the question of why now and why Avraham might be, because he asked, because he saw, because he was curious, because he noticed, because he couldn't just kind of stumble through life assuming, depending, again, which image you follow, all of this happened by accident, or he couldn't just stumble through life and say, it's someone else's problem to fix this. Either of those two is the beginning of theology according to this midrash. The beginning of theology both directions, our interest in God and God's interest in us, is the first time a person said, Now, if you try to map Torah and midrash onto anthropology, right, and we moderns who live in the academy and also live in the world of text try to hold both, that happened at some point. You can make the argument anthropologically that when did God begin? Again, anthropologically, not religiously. God began the first time someone looked up and said, how did this all come to be? Or, how do we try to fix the massive chaos of this world? Right? That might be an anthropological, historical answer to how the concept of God came into humanity. The Torah can't possibly imagine that we invented God, right? The Midrash can't imagine that. So they're saying God was waiting to be discovered, right? You ever think philosophy, like the next math theorem that will be discovered already exists. The person who comes up with it is not inventing a mathematical concept. It's just becoming aware of something that already is true about the mathematical world or the physical world, right? Einstein didn't invent relativity. He just understood it, right? So God in this Midrash was always there as the manhig, always there either as the one who turned the light on or the one who was there to be responsible for the fire. Avraham said, it's got to be something. God says, now is my time to break through. I choose you. Stevie? Gary and Marlise, for some reason, the way the audio is working, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So I see that your hand is up, but unfortunately, even if you say something, I won't hear it. I apologize for that. Normally that's not the case, but I'm sorry in advance that we can't include your contribution. Yeah.
There's a somewhat famous academic treatise on this Midrash that argues, first of all, that Bira is some kind of an apartment building, but that's beside the point. But it argues that there's a difference between manhig and Baal, and that that this building should have a custodian, someone who puts out the fire, but that the owner is a different character, and God is looking down, perhaps trapped in the building, right, where the fire's burning, and saying, I need help from somebody.
Save me.
So then the metaphor is, right, I can't act in the world directly, I need you to do this. But yes, it's like a, rescue me situation. Or, and the person says, like, is there no custodian? And then the implicit is, I need someone to fill that.
Good. So wonderful. I'm not aware of that treatment of it, but that's an evocative treatment of it. And if we had to assess this Midrash so far, the Midrash, not the text, the Torah, is this moment between Avram and God more about what is unique about God or more about what is unique about Avram? In the Midrash. Yeah, in the Midrash, is the Midrash making the case that this moment of Lekh L'kha is more about what is unique about Avram or more about what is unique about God? Hold the thought. Let's compare it to the next one. Okay? The next one is the next Midrash in the collection. So the next thing you read in Midrashic literature after the one we read is this one. Vayomer Adonai al Avram. God said to Avram, the same quote from the verse. And now we have a different Rabbi Berechia, Patach. He also is doing a Petichta. He's opening with a verse from something else, and he's going to connect that verse to our story. And his verse is from Shir HaShirim, the ecstatic love poem of the Song of Songs. L'reach shmanecha tovim, by the odor of your beautiful oils. Shemen turak shemecha, your name is like oil that has been poured. And so in the love story, just saying the lover's name is enlightening, and just saying your name is like poured fine oil. Okay, so we hang that verse out there, and what does he say? Amar Rabbi Berechia, Rabbi Berechia said, Lama haya Avraham avinu domeh. Can what be Avraham compared to? Right? How should we think of this man Avraham that God plucked from the obscurity of the names of all the people in that generation and said, I'm going to build my people through you? Litzlochit shel, it's a great word, apopil simon. To a flask of apopil simun is translated as balsam. You can actually see the consonants are similar, right? Balsam, pil simun. So it's some Greek word that meant whatever balsam is. You're going to say. You think it's a grapefruit oil? Yes. He can be compared to a flask of balsam oil, Mukefet Tzamid Patil. That is encircled, covered, mukefet, like hakafa, like on Simchat Torah, that's encircled, Tzamid Patil, with a cover that's fastened. So imagine, like a bottle of perfume, right? Isn't a bottle of perfume amazing? It's an incredibly compressed and concentrated odor. But when it doesn't, what does the outside of the bottle smell like? Nothing, right? I mean, if you really put your nose up to the spot where it comes out, you can sense it, right? But a bottle of fragrant spice or oil, right, doesn't smell like, why do we open up the top to the besamim in a few minutes? Because if it's closed, you're not going to smell the cinnamon, right? So imagine a flask of this balsam oil. Turn the page. Umunachat bezavid. It's been set aside in the corner. People have forgotten about it. Even though it's an incredibly concentrated, beautiful smell, it's in the corner. Nobody puts balsam in the corner. It's covered. It's forgotten. Velo haya recho nodef. So its odor is not wafting, right? What a sad thing, right? Imagine something so beautiful that's never been seen. A taste so delicious that no one's ever tasted. A perfume so extraordinary, but no one's ever whiffed it. It's stuck in a corner. Kevan shahaita mitaltelet. But if you were to uncork it and walk around the room with that flask, what would happen? The whole room would begin to smell like it. Haya roche nodef. Recho nodef. Its odor would spread. Kach amar hakadosh baruch hu la'Avraham Avinu. This is exactly what God said to Avraham, our father. Taltel atzmacha. Take yourself, Avraham. Mimakom lemakom. From place to place. V'shimcha mitgadel ba'olam. And your name will become great in the world. So, in this midrash, we don't know what it is about Avraham that makes him special. But God senses in Avraham, or maybe in any person, the image of a stopped-up concentration of incredible fragrance, which, if opened and moved around, the odor will spread and the beauty will become something others will recognize. Because Midrash doesn't explain itself, we don't know which one it means. Does it mean that God saw Avraham and only Avraham as a bottle of balsam oil stuck in the corner that no one had known about, but once it's opened up and moved around, Avraham's sweetness will be known? Or is this eeny, meeny, miny Avraham, right? That all of humanity was just waiting to be opened up, and through their relationship with God, God's name will become great, and he chose Avraham. It says, I'm going to put myself in you, open the top of your flask, go around and spread you, and by spreading you, you're going to spread me. Either way, it's an indication that whatever is true and good about Avraham and a person has to be shared, exposed, moved around, or it's going to be like a tree falling in a forest that no one's ever heard of. One second, Bob. These two combined is the first two attempts by the rabbis to try to understand Avraham. What would make him leave? Why would God choose him? Why now? Why does it all matter? What's the potential impact? Bob.
I was going to say, the first discussion explains the text.
In what way?
Well, Abraham was asking questions, and so he was the one that could spread.
Very nice. So if number 2 is not a separate text, but a commentary, number 1, or extension, number 1, once it has been established that Avram is the type of person who will ask the questions and begin a theological reality, then let's take him out of the obscurity of Ur, of Haran, and send him into the land of Canaan, and all of a sudden his odor is going to spread. His bouquet is going to spread. Okay, look at source number 3. We'll do this quickly because I didn't realize how much time had gone by. The Maharal of Prague. So this is, 1,500 years later. But he knows these sources by heart. Not 1,500, 1,300 years later. I'm going to read it in Hebrew. You can follow it in Hebrew as I translate, or in English. He asks a really good question, particularly on the heels of Parshat Noach. Befarsha HaKodemet, in the previous Parsha, Kshakatuv medaber b'Noach, when the text talks about Noach, potech b'shivcho, it begins by describing Noach and praising Noach. Shahayat Sadiq. Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav, that Noach was the most righteous person of his generation. V'lama lo nemar b'torah kodem amar Hashem l'Avraham Lekh L'kha sheya Avraham tzadik v'yir Elohim. Why does the Torah tell us nothing about Avraham? Literally, the only thing that we know about Avraham before Parshat Lekh L'kha is what? That he was born. And then we know the name of his father. That's it. He was listed in a genealogy at the end of the previous Parsha. So if Noach, on whose merit the world's going to be saved, we learn something about why God chose him, why Avraham, through whom the world's going to, let's say, be spiritually saved, because God's going to turn Avraham into his people, why do we know nothing about who he is? Why do we know that he's a tzaddik? Why do we know that he fears God? Ella, his answer. Il malei nemar kach, if we indeed had learned something about Avram's character, hayab mashma, we would have interpreted, shebechirat Adonai ba'Avraham, that Abraham's God's selection of Avraham, uvizaro and his offspring, haytam mitam zeh, would have been for the very reasons that we considered him to be exceptional, right? If the Torah describes Avraham exceptional in a certain way, not the Midrash tried, but if the Torah described Avraham as exceptional, and then say that God spoke to him, we think, God only speaks to people like that. God only spoke to because he was exceptional. Ve'im chas v'shalom, and if God forbid, bizman min hazmanim, as time went on, b'nei Yisrael yu bilti zakim, let's say Avram's descendants all of a sudden lost that spark, lost whatever it was about Avraham that made him choosable. Tibatel chalila habichira. We might have assumed that therefore the selection would expire. We might assume that God has chosen us for as long as we're worthy of being chosen. Whatever one thinks of chosenness, and it's a tricky subject, there's no Jewish theology that suggests that God has chosen us conditionally, that we're God's people for as long as God fancies us. Right? It's a lifetime selection. Kim ma'amaram zal, as the sages said in Pirkei Avot, some of you may know this quote, Kol ahava shehi tluya b'davar, any love that is dependent on a thing, on the way someone looks, on the way on the way someone acts in a particular situation, batel davar, if the thing goes away, if the beauty fades, batla ahava, then the love will expire. The inverse is continued in the next half of Pirkei Avot, but it's not quoted here. Any love that is not dependent on a thing has a chance of lasting forever because it's not vulnerable. L'chein lo siper hakatuv kodem lachach davar al tzidkat Avraham. Therefore, the verse tells us nothing about the righteousness of Avraham to suggest that God did not choose Avraham for any particular reason. God did not choose Avraham because he was a theological questioner. God did not choose Avraham because he had a beautiful odor that was going to be spread around the world. We don't want you to think that God chose Avraham for a something, because then you might think that if that something dissipates from Avraham's descendants, God will unchoose us. Lahorot, to instruct, Shabechira hi ta'alumat Adonai. I love this phrase, ta'alumat Adonai. The selection was a mystery, an enigma of God. Why did God choose Avraham? Why did God choose us? Why the land of Canaan? We don't know. The Maharal knows the Midrashic attempt to try to answer the question, but he thinks the question is best left unanswered. It's just the mystery, Urotzono Yitbarach, God's will. Shela'olam lo too far, it'll never expire, v'lo titbatel, will not be canceled. Uleolam Yehu Yisrael Zera Kadosh, and the Jewish people will always be holy seed. V'afal pisha chata Yisraelhu. And he now quotes from a Talmudic idea that a Jew, even if the Jew sinned ad infinitum, remains a Jew. You can't convert out of Judaism, right? If you come to my office this week and you say, I'm new to the community, and I was brought up a Christian, and my mother was brought up a Christian, and my grandmother was brought up a Christian, but I traced, and my mother's mother was Jewish, then guess what? You're a Jew, right? We might dunk you in the mikveh as a ritual of return, but you are a Jew because a Jew can't leave Judaism. Even this commentary by the Maharal can be understood at least two ways. Either it's saying since there's nothing that a Jew can do to cancel this relationship with God, it's not a jingoistic idea to think of ourselves as chosen. We don't think of ourselves as superior because it just happened that way. There's nothing superior about it, it just is. Or you could critique it and say, well, if there's no stinkiness that the Jewish people could descend into, that would have us lose this title, this category, being God's chosen, then really is the notion of chosenness worth anything at all. All of these texts are trying to grapple with how did this begin? Why did it begin? Why did it begin then? Why did God want it to begin? Why did it begin with Abraham? And what are we supposed to do with that all these generations later? Larry, it's put the comma after chata. Afal pisha chata, even if he sinned, comma, Yisraelhu, he's still Yisrael. Yeah, I don't think that the Maharal is missing a word, but there are versions of that quote that might have the word Yisrael appear twice. Afal pisha chata Yisrael, comma, Adayin Yisraelhu. It's the same idea. Yeah. So I leave this with you here because once again we're in the part of the cycle where we are going to get to know Avraham and his travels and his descendants, and we're going to follow them into Egypt, and we're going to follow them out of Egypt. And it gives us another full year to ponder why it is that we should consider ourselves connected to that man, that story, that choice, and ultimately that God.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.